this being the first paper that we're testing out, the interesting thing for me here was actually to try it out with different mediums on that one paper.
Right, it says works best with pencil colors, gel pen, chalk, pastel, metallic color, acrylic colors, and it is for dry media, so no drinking while you're around it. Hello and welcome to Stationery Test Drive with Inky Memo.
Today we're talking about the Sundaram black sketchbook for artists.
I'm Samir.
This is Minjal.
And I'm Vishal, and wonder of wonders, we are artists. We are also calligraphers and designers, so this should be right up our alley.
We are also premium.
We are also premium. Are we A4? I mean, I'm more than 180 GSM, but maybe if you stretch me out.
We're mostly made in India.
Do we have books for success? We are surrounded by them. I'm high bulk, that's for sure. And if all this jocularity and mirth does not convince you that we are less than reverent about the process and art of art, well, that's what we do on this show. We take things for a test drive because we have varied points of view on things. We each take an implement. Sometimes today we are doing a paper for the first time. It is black. It's not just the cover, and we each do something different with it. Usually we see them on the same day when we're recording. So Samir, why don't you show us what you have done?
This is my piece on the black Sundaram paper, and it's, for a change, it's lettering based rather than a figure.
Samir is a graphic designer by trade, so am I really, and with a bit of illustration. Minjal among us is the actual professional working calligrapher. So sometimes we like to bumble around. I don't think you have bumbled around in this one too much, Samir.
Yeah, I mean, this was going back to, I think, my college days and kind of making abstract letter forms and trying to put them together in various interesting ways.
Do we ever want to go back to college days?
Not really.
No.
Well, not the days, but the work. I think we did. We looked through an old carton of papers recently and we found some of your old calligraphic things,
yes.
Right? If I have pictures, I'll put them up on screen right now.
Yeah, I think the reason I mentioned college days is because in some cases, for many of us, that's the last time we experiment with anything as far as the work is concerned. We have not fallen into that trap and have continued doing interesting new experiments through this show. But it was a great test to just try this out with lettering and to try it out with different mediums, because this being the first paper that we're testing out, the interesting thing for me here was actually to try it out with different mediums on that one paper.
Right, it says works best with pencil colors, gel pen, chalk, pastel, metallic color, acrylic colors, and it is for dry media, so no drinking while you're around it.
So it's interesting that, I don't think I quite used pencil colors. I did use a gel pen because the white pen is a white jelly roll.
We'll be seeing more of that when I show you mine.
Which is the gel pen, and we have covered that in a previous video. So,
yes, we have. It was a very fun implement.
I guess you could call an oil pastel something like a chalk. Right. And it actually does a very convincing chalk impression on this black paper.
And oil pastels do contain chalk in some form, right? As a medium sometimes?
I don't think so. I think those are more the normal chalk pastels.
Or is that gouache? I'm thinking.
Gouache also does contain chalk. So chalk is actually found in a fair number of mediums. So, and acrylic colors. Actually, I think the gold here is done with the Posca marker, which we will be covering in a future episode. And I don't know if acrylics are actually in Posca markers, but I know that a lot of artists like to think of them as acrylic paints in a pen. So, yeah, this kind of covers a few different kinds of mediums on the black paper, and I thought that was a good way to test it out.
So which of these mediums did you have the most trouble putting down? Which ones worked out well?
the Sundaram black paper is a fairly smooth surfaced paper. So the thing I've noticed with a lot of black paper, because I've tested out other ones before, is that most of them come in some sort of a textured surface.
Yeah.
Because I guess mostly to do with the fact that you end up using things like pastels on them, which are the only things that would be visible on a dark color. And pastels require a textured surface, whereas this is a perfectly smooth surface, and that was interesting to try out. The gel pens and the Poscas worked perfectly on this medium, I have to say. There was absolutely nothing to complain about. I was actually surprised to find that the oil pastels worked fairly well on this.
You got a fairly decent
I
line.
got quite an even...
there's a bit of here, at least I think you may have rubbed out a little.
I think the only thing I would say this paper suffers from is that because it's such a smooth surface, when you do rub things out, you kind of end up getting that slightly reflective. I don't know if it shows up on camera.
Yeah, I encountered that
that
too.
Slightly reflective place where kind of the surface changes texture. But besides that, I would say it's a fairly hardy and versatile kind of paper. It's not the most heavy. It's fairly light. I think it says it's 180 GSM.
It doesn't really feel it. I will be honest about that.
Yeah.
But it's not too expensive. It's 325 rupees in India, and probably you can get it cheaper because MRPs are...
Yeah, and I'd say that it's not the blackest of the black papers that you can find.
It's a matte. You could... If this was a suit fabric, you'd call it like a charcoal rather than a black.
But overall, I'd say it's been a fairly good experience.
Minjal, do you agree? Do you disagree?
Show us what you've done.
Yeah.
So this is what I came up with. I had to actually bring out the heavy ammunition for this. So I actually used the Liquitex paint markers. Now, obviously, the book says that, you avoid...
silver and very, very... But go ahead.
So I tried using a couple of things which really worked very well for me, which actually I'll just demonstrate. Now, these markers are really fun to use, and this paper kind of takes the color quite well.
Oh, that's beautiful.
For me, this test was actually more about the markers, which, that's not what we were covering.
Well, we'll do an episode on them then.
I did have a lot of fun using these.
I think the silver itself is a great pairing for a black paper.
And also in this case, now, what a lot of artists will do is they will take a canvas, they will prime it, they will paint the background black.
Okay.
Now with the black paper, obviously, you save yourself some time and then you can just start with the markers itself. So that was my test drive. I did mix a golden with the silver.
Also a Liquitex.
To get this effect.
You were right when we were kind of getting off topic towards talking about the markers, but how was it to layer these markers on this paper?
The markers, actually, the Liquitex, they're water-based markers.
Okay.
So you have to put down the first layer, maybe wait for a minute or two.
Okay.
And then put down the second layer.
And as much as we are talking about the markers there, that also has to do a lot with the quality of the paper, whether you can go over it twice or thrice.
No, what happened when I was using, when I was actually putting down the first layer, the paper kind of wilted. It maybe it is not meant for water-based.
Well, they do say that it is made for dry media.
So I thought I would challenge the Sundaram black paper and see, but it did wilt a little bit, but it kind of then settled back into shape.
I think Stationery Challenge, a much more violent version of this show, is something we should consider an offshoot of.
I think the thing that I'm finding that's common between what you did and I did, and which is the strength of this paper, is that it actually genuinely looks and feels like a chalkboard.
That's right.
Because I've looked at other art black papers, and their strength is how sort of perfectly deep black they are. But this one's strength is in some ways the fact that it's this charcoal grey.
Yeah.
And
it's a thin portable chalkboard.
you can see that with the Liquitex markers and the oil pastels, it very much ends up looking like it is a chalkboard.
Right.
Speaking of chalkboard.
Yeah, did any of us try chalk? We have some chalk here.
Yes, I did. I have these chalks from Ikea. And they do work well. Chalks, as a medium, they're messy.
Very messy.
But you can get nice. I think the Ikea chalk is really good. It's very pigmented. I don't know if that's what term you use with chalks, but they're nice to use.
It's certainly much better than the chalks we grew up with in school.
I think it's partly to do with the pigment and also to do with the density of the chalk itself.
Yes, I'm sure it's much more refined than the ones that we grew up with.
So an episode on chalk soon then, yes?
Definitely. If we get to do this a lot.
And if we ever get to figure out how to clean up the mess of chalks, because that is... Yeah.
No, but that is a market, right? Fixatives for chalks. Are there any, or maybe we...
There are things like fixative sprays, there are varnishes, but I think the problem with chalk, and again, we're going off topic, but yes, it is a matter of bonding it to a paper. This paper is quite smooth. Maybe there is...
Textured paper.
Yes. So while chalk is in some ways the driest of mediums, it's probably not the best for this. I went with entirely wet mediums, so to speak, even though technically they would be dry. Mine was done with the Sakura jelly roll white gel pen, mostly, and a bit of the Posca white and gold markers. I had a lot of fun with this one. It's a lot smoother than the usual cartridge papers I use, so in some ways the jelly roll took to it quite well. I could almost noodle it in these very fine kind of ways. Less of a painterly approach, more of a kind of almost like a brass cut look to them, and that's quite nice. Just like it's chalk, it could also be a print. That's the flexibility I liked about this.
I think Minjal and my work very much reminds me of chalkboard drawings and art. Yours actually reminds me of Silverpoint.
Yes, Silverpoint. That's the thing that I was looking for. And please explain Silverpoint to people who don't know it.
So Silverpoint is essentially a board with a metallic foil, which is then painted over with a black paint or a black medium, and you scrape out the black paint with a metallic stylus. And exposing the silver and hence sort of drawing in negative of sorts.
I've always been curious about using those, but I never could muster up the courage to pick up those kits because I'd see them in stationery stores and bookstores. They'd always have a really nice etching of a deer or some kind of other, usually American fauna. I think we should test those out because I've rarely used a black paper for anything before. Yes, there's chalkboards, but those are always temporary. But I think I like I was surprised by the versatility of both what we have gotten here, but also what I then started thinking of doing with this. These are all test drives, but I'm sure we can do more elaborate painterly things, more, right here I think we've got 5, 6, 7 different implements that we've tried on this paper.
Yes, and the interesting thing about black paper is we're so used to writing in a positive,
an additive way.
Not just additive, but positive in that it's black on white or red on white or whatever. As soon as you get black and then you have to kind of put in your idea of negative space is flipped.
Yes.
And that's been a very interesting experiment. And I think because of that, we have also pushed ourselves to use materials which we would normally not.
So black paper or any colored paper would basically be pulp mixed with some kind of dye. Is that how colored paper is actually made?
Yes. Most papers are essentially just a dye that's mixed in with the paper pulp as it's being made. I assume black paper is as old as paper itself. I doubt it's something that no one thought of from the early days. And if it is as old as paper itself, I assume that most black paper uses carbon black as its pigment.
Okay.
Because it's the simplest pigment to make. It's what India ink and a lot of inks have used for millennia.
So carbon, I guess you just get it from organic sources such as off paper pulp.
Carbon black is actually, it's an interesting process. It's done by burning oils and things and collecting the soot that comes off it onto, I believe, glass vessels traditionally, and you kind of scrape that off and that becomes your pigment.
It's a fascinating process and it's a fascinating paper. Downsides, yes, the only thing is if you rub it out, then there are going to be stains and you can see a few there. I didn't bother rubbing out my pencils. There was certain sort of silveriness to them now, which helps with this thing, but
rubbing pencil marks off the paper, I also faced the same problem. It's difficult to completely erase it.
Yeah, you kind of have to be very deliberate, and probably even fingerprints will end up on this quite easily. It does not seem to have any difference in tooth on either side. At least I don't think there is usually on papers, because of the way they're pressed out, there's sometimes a sort of shinier side. This one seems to be fairly even on both sides.
I think all of the downsides to this paper that we are mentioning, which are very few honestly, are all to do with the fact that the paper is not as dense as some more professional papers.
Right. It says 180 GSM, but
that's the same reason why you can't erase out a pencil mark completely. It's the same reason why they're suggesting it for dry media rather than water-based media. It's that the density of the fiber isn't very high, and therefore it kind of indents easily and also absorbs water easily. But other than that, I think it's a fairly good piece of
I think
medium to work on.
We covered some of this in the jelly roll, that there was a specific way of getting a clean line by sort of reducing your pressure that you would put on it. And I think that's true of this paper as well. It takes to mediums that require less pressure, such as these markers. Anything that kind of like sits on top is fine. Anything that probably tries to gouge into it, paradoxically or rather ironically, the opposite of things like Silverpoint.
Yeah.
But you get a similar thing to Silverpoint, you get a similar thing to chalk, a similar thing to acrylic gesso that's black. It's more versatile than we thought, and as much as we made fun of it at the beginning, I think it's worthy for artists. It's not too expensive. It is very much variety can be derived from it. It has a cool eagle with a proper smooth treatment on it.
And I definitely think we should be looking at more colored and negative drawing mediums as time goes by, because it definitely forces us to use different tools and implements than we normally would.
And we should definitely check out things like the Liquitex in the future. I think that is all for this week. We will be back with more experiments every week, more tools, more papers soon. Until then, I'm Vishal.
I'm Samir.
This is Minjal.
And this has been Stationery Test Drive. The future is not, dark, but it's certainly black.